Thank you so much to everybody and for the professor for very, very great statistics. I'm going to start by telling you a story. In the spring of 2010, 10 years ago, I was riding a train surrounded by working men and working women, and they were heading home for the night. And my small baby at the time, my baby, was wrapped against my chest. His head was, you could see the head. And as I was seated, the passengers around me on the train, they saw my baby. And somebody on the train, she asked me, "Is he your first baby?" And so I said, no, he's my sixth. At this, there was a little bit of surprise. And the woman then, she said to me, "I guess your husband still wants you." So what I want to tell you today is a message, maybe a little bit of hope in light of these statistics, but of course I'm going to tell you a lot of things about the United States. In the social sciences, I was trained in economics. In the social sciences, mostly what we study is disorder. We study disorder, we study dysfunction, and we study insanity. We study what it means to be insane. Nobody in the social sciences studies order. They don't study function, and they don't study sanity, or what we might also call the good and the beautiful and the true. There are reasons for this about social sciences, and that's a subject for another day. But a social science of disorder fails to achieve wisdom, since it's the witness of truth which makes conversion possible and points to the restoration of the social order, something that Luigi Sturzo talked about. So for instance, when Jesus says in the scripture, "You are right to say that you have no husband. You have had 6 husbands." And also when he said, "What God has joined together, let no one put asunder," the mission of Jesus Christ and the church includes telling the truth about the family. In a 2-child world that is coming down to a 1-child world, if you have 8 children or 6 children or 5 children, you have to make an explanation. Why do you have all of these children, and what does it mean for your marriage? There is not a single teaching to suggest in the Catholic Church that you are more holy or more good if you have more children. It would be difficult to make a case that there is a social norm among Catholics, at least in the United States, or any preaching from the bishops to have big families. Maybe for me, nothing sums up this condition better than when Pope Francis was on an airplane and he was asked about this question, and he said, "To be a good Catholic, women do not have to breed like rabbits." So if these are not the answer, what is the answer? Why do I have 8 children? The answer is difficult to say on a train. The answer is some kind of deeply held faith confirmed by experience that the capacity to bear children, to dwell with them, to enjoy them, that thing, being a mother, be it childbearing or fertility, that it's the most worthwhile thing in the world. As I had more children, the sense of value increased. With my 7th child, I remember that I could not believe how blessed it was that God would give us another child. My sense of my own role, in fact, diminished, and the more each child seemed as a pure miracle, as a gift of God. Why, if you believe and then you experience that a child is a gift from God, why will you say no to another child? After the end of having children, when I was done, you was asked, the question seems to me crazy. Why did you have 8 children? It's not the question. How was I so blessed to be given 8 children, right? Completely different question. But that is not easy to say on a train in rush hour. So in the summer of 2019, I traveled around to 10 American cities and asked 55 women with big families in the United States about why they do this and what they think that it means. The desire for childbearing, like the demand for children, when we say in the social sciences, the demand, and how it's related to competing human goods. It's not a small thing, right? We just saw this, it's a very big thing. And there is no more economic question. So, I mean, I'm an economist, right? There's no more economic question than where people come from and how many of us there will be. The ideas of Thomas Malthus and John Maynard Keynes, really mostly the mainstream of economics, are deeply embedded in economic thought today. Like, you cannot separate them out. But in fact, there are two separate lines of economic thought, one line which takes its origin in Malthus, and the other which takes its origin mostly in Adam Smith. And so as I began to investigate these questions for personal reasons, it became professional quickly. This is going to surprise you, but the study of low birth rates academically has focused entirely on low birth rates. This is a kind of disorder. So I realized that there's something of opportunity to contribute if you want to study people with high birth rates, right? Nobody studies the high birth rates. What can we learn from them? So this is a big opportunity. And so I like to describe it like this. We learn about immunity to disease by studying healthy people, not by studying the sick people. It's a kind of principle of inoculation. The smallpox vaccine was discovered by observing that people who were exposed to cowpox didn't get sick from smallpox, not as sick. So who's immune from the picture we just saw? Who's immune? So it's a state of disease. Those kind of birth rates are a state of disease. And we can say this now, but the politicians now, they agree with us. They see now finally it's a state of disease because you can't support the modern state with birth rates as low as they are. So what can we learn from them? In the past, birth rates depended more on weather and on the crops and on famine and disease. But today, with chemical birth control, fertility is an object of choice very directly. I mean, if you saw that first graph with the birth rates, it takes a sharp downward turn in 1962. It takes a downward turn in 1962. So it's a completely different world that we live in now. This is why we have to find out whether people want children at all and why they want them. And how will they know if they want them? Because the urge to form families and the sexual appetite alone no longer just brings children, right? You can form a family and become chemically sterile from a young age, starting your family life chemically sterile. So unless the capacity for childbearing is turned on, children don't come. They're not automatic. They have to be chosen at the beginning. So we have to study people who want children and find out why they want children. To exclude those testimonies from the question of policymaking, the answer of the state, it's, as we say in English, it's a solution looking for a problem. To be sure, the problem is low birth rates. But policy only works on the cost side. It only works on the cost side. You can make some of the costs, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute. But we are assuming that the problem is the cost side. It's the cost basis, that it's the primary thing for the decision to have a child. We have been assuming that. But like the labor problem that Marx created, the search for a cost basis for prices and wages is futile. It turns out. Things are not valuable because people made them. They're valuable economically when people want them. And labor is more highly rewarded when it applies to things that people want. There's a similar insight about children. Children do have intrinsic value, of course, but as an economic decision, which is what policymakers focus on, children have value when people are willing to give up other things to get them. So we see today, right now, my conclusion from my research is that we have a crisis in the value of children. People don't want children. It's not a crisis of the high cost of having children. Costs are not driving those low birth rates. Demand is driving low birth rates, low demand for children. I'm going to tell you something about the birth rates in the United States briefly. At the beginning of the founding of the United States, we've always had higher birth rates than in Europe, and early commentators noticed this. Tocqueville noticed this. At the time of the American founding, the total fertility rate of American women was about 7 or 8 children per woman. By 1900, that number was in half, down to 4, and by today, now it's in half again. It's just around 2, but now below 2. The United States did also record its lowest fertility rate ever just recently. We're now, believe it or not, about 1.64. So as 2 speakers already said, we're looking much more like Europe today. Of course, the explanation for the first change, the early change in the 1800s, is the change away from agricultural and home-based work. But scholars are now debating if the second change, the change that started in 1962, right, that big change in birth rates, is that the same trend from before? Is it what happened in the 1800s, or is it something new? And many scholars are going to start arguing now that it's something new because it's not stable. It's not a change to something now we're balancing something. It's not stable. It keeps going lower and lower. So that's something new. There is little debate now among these American demographers, but the slowing of birth rates in the middle of the century resulted from a new calculus centered on the role of women and the competition between work and family introduced at the time of the birth control pill. The pill made it possible for women to postpone childbearing, invest in higher education, pursue a career, all of this without delaying marriage or partnership. Between 1960, when the first contraceptive pill was approved in the States, and the end of the century, the share of women in the labor force went from 35% to 60%, kind of doubling. Labor economists will tell you that also since that time, nobody has had as many children as they wanted to have. It's a competition between career and family. However, this is what's interesting. This competition between career and family is not the whole story of American birth rates in the 20th century. A very small proportion of women did not fall short of their desired birth rates, and still today, many women have families as large as those in 1800 at the founding of the country. These women are largely hidden from popular view, although you see me today. They are in the uppermost tail of the birth rate distribution. About 5% of American women still have 5 or more children, compared to 20% in the 1970s. So it's reduced, but it's not, 5% is still pretty big. About 1% of American women still have more than 7 children. Despite the large decrease since 1976, the percentage of women having 5 or more has stayed relatively constant and has not continued to fall. Why do these women still have 5 or 7 children? But I want to tell you that I think they hold the secret to the kind of potential solutions to what we're looking at today. The American public policy debate about birth rates is just starting because we assumed for too long that we were immune from the same problems of the West. But now it's just begun. And this debate currently, and I mean really currently, I'm going to discuss this next week in Washington, it currently makes 2 assumptions that my research challenges. The first assumption is that highly religious people will obviously have children. Who are those people? You can look at the birth rates in the state of Israel. Looks very different from birth rates in Italy and Spain. Highly religious people will obviously have children, but their reasons cannot be understood and they're irrelevant for policy. I think that's wrong. The second is that pro-family policy could do its work in any kind of culture whatsoever, that you can incentivize anything with a cash payment. I think that's wrong. So I'm going to read to you a few quotations from one case study. I have one example. I have many, many more stories, but in the interest of time, I'm going to read you a few quotations. And then I'm going to give you just a few conclusions the way I'm thinking today about the urgent interventions that we can make that the professor asked for. So this is a case study of a woman who was 40 years old when I went to speak with her. She lives in the New England in the upper Northeast. She was expecting her 5th child when I went to speak with her. Remember, I went to speak with women to say, why do you do this? Why do you have 5 children? How? And so her name was Leah. She is Jewish. She told us that she graduated college and attended a religious women's training after that. And after that, she got married. She said, I knew going into marriage that our intention was to start a family right away, like we weren't getting married to wait. I was in a very intentional mindset. When I got married, my son was born 10 months after we got married. She highlighted the importance for her. She went to a very secular college in the United States, was a normal college student. She didn't come out of an Orthodox Jewish community. She said, so this is her, she said, I think I always knew that I wanted to have children, but I never had an idea like I want to have X number of children. And I didn't grow up with a lot of siblings. And I did not grow up super religious, she said. I grew up in a Reformed congregation, which is basically completely secular. And she said, and now today we've chosen a different life where we are much more intentionally practicing religion and what's traditional. We picked this. For her and her husband, having children was a part of marriage. They were linked together with a sense of mission and purpose in relation to God's plan for them. When you listen to what I'm going to tell you from Leah, think about those questions of what policy can do. Policy cannot give anybody this mindset, right? But policy can make space for this mindset to develop. So keep that in mind. She says, as a young mom, when she had her first baby, she says it was incredibly hard to go through another pregnancy after the first pregnancy. She said, I was tired. I didn't sleep through the night, but I really saw it as divine providence and God's will for me. And I really felt like it was a blessing. Another subject that I spoke to, another Jewish woman, not the same woman, she said, God is not out to trick us and send us trouble. He really wants to send us blessings. Yes, things don't always turn out the way you might have expected it, but children are a great source of blessing, and God wants us to have more blessings, more healthy children, and we should ask for that. Great line. The woman I'm telling you about, Leah, she said, I think when I had my first 2 children, I was hyper committed to my goals. I was recording full-length CDs and playing in concerts and having rehearsals late at night. I had more energy and stamina and the will and the drive. I think that has definitely been affected by having a large family. And I think that after a 3rd and a 4th, it's a challenge. It's not easy now to pursue personal dreams and pursuits as it used to be. It was a sacrifice that I made because I value having a large family and I value every child as a gift. But I wouldn't be honest if I said it wasn't a struggle. And I think I've had to sacrifice some of my own interests and pursuits at this time. But they're not on hold forever. As a mother of a large family, you have to understand sometimes things are on the back burner. But it doesn't mean the burner is off. It just means that you change your priorities and rotate as needed. Our culture really values a sort of rigid perception of success and work and has started to devalue a mother's contribution to society. It's almost, she says, it's almost radical and feminist to say that my contribution is children. It's not just my music, she said, or how much money we make or anything like that. These are all secondary to what you contribute, which is the future of humanity. She also said, literally, the future is about good people being in the world, people that will go on to raise their own healthy, happy families. And yes, for me, she said, coming from a divorced family, this was a big motivation for me to choose this life. The family unit being the priority above career and identity. I could tell you many more things that would make you very moved, but I want to move now to my suggestions from the rest of my research. Very short, brief suggestions because we have so many fine things to hear today. I said before that my research challenges two myths about people who are having large families. The first is that religious childbearing could not be relevant for policy. And second is that you can incentivize people to have children through lots of subsidies. And subsidies are what? I mean, it's a way of socializing the costs and reducing personal costs. So this is what I learned. Religious women of many religions, I spoke to women of multiple faiths, more in the United States, mostly Mormon, evangelical Christian, Catholic, Jewish. Like everybody else, they say there's costs and there's benefits, right? This is a very rational decision. This is not cult behavior. It's very rational. The Pope, they don't have 8 kids because the Pope says they have 8 kids, right? Or the rabbi. They talk about costs and they talk about values or benefits. The big story that I'm here to tell you, what came out of my research, is that what makes Leah different is that for her, the values are different. The benefits are different, not the costs. She had a musical career. She went to college. She had the opportunity to make a lot of money, but she values it more. And she values it more because she had a deep religious experience. I also found out on the cost side that personal and lifestyle costs, what do I mean? Waking up at night for 3 times every night for 10 years, that's a much bigger cost than the financial cost. So for most women, the financial costs were much smaller than the personal cost. Also, the lifestyle cost or the status cost. I mean, after 5 children, it's very hard to have a full-time job. So you look different than everybody else that went to college. So the lifestyle costs, these are the bigger ones. Giving up a career versus giving up income. Those are 2 different things. As women had more children in my study, the more numbers that they had, we observed that reports of the marginal cost, like when you have 5 children, how hard is it to have 6? The marginal cost, financially, personally, to go from 5 to 6, it's very small. Nothing changes. You don't even need a new car, right? Everything's the same. But the marginal joy is very big because the joy of the child is now shared between more people. It's like exponential. So many of them explain this to me. And that's how you can go from, well, we were the kind of people, we had 3 and we thought, oh, we have 4. And then the next minute we have 12. Like, how does that happen? Well, at some point, the joys become much bigger than the costs. The marginal costs of having a child are biggest when for the first child. Everything changes. Everything changes. So from a policy perspective, if you want to push people to have the next child, the easier job is to push people from 4 to 5 or 3 to 4. To push people from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, almost impossible. Can't be done. I think it cannot be done. Now, that's not from my research. That's a survey of all the research that I've looked at. I think you cannot do it. So I have 2 sets of conclusions. In terms of family policy at the level of the state, to have people have more children, you have to get the benefit higher. The value has to be higher. Financial rewards are not sufficient. So where does that come from? It comes from religious beliefs, from culture. So the state cannot save the family. The state can promote and protect the churches and religious communities. But only the church and religious belief can save the family. I'm going to make a couple of points about two small things. Not family leave. In the United States, a lot of this discussion is based on more generous payments to women to stay home with their babies when they have a baby before they go back to work. This is really interesting. It hasn't worked in most places in South Korea. It went the other way. When maternity leave policies were more generous, women had fewer children. People scratched their heads, what's going on? I want to say something really obvious. I have a lot of children. For women, working when you have a baby makes motherhood much less pleasant. It makes it harder to enjoy your baby. Nobody's saying this, right? There's not some kind of magic formula for making it more pleasant to have more work and more children. The two things compete against each other, and not just in terms of time, but in terms of enjoyment. If you don't see your child for 10 hours a day, that really hurts. It hurts your child, and it hurts you, and it hurts your relationship. And that's not very fun. Why would you want to do that another time? It was hard to do it once. Why would you do it again? The other one is these, various forms of subsidies through the welfare state. I mean, you just saw a perfect presentation, so I don't need to tell you again about the fiscal crisis that's coming for all of the states, and this crisis is coming because you cannot have the welfare state if you don't have birth rates that are at 3 or above. You can't do it, so we won't have the money, so it's not even a question. I'm going to go to Washington next week, and I'm going to say, don't do more bigger welfare state to have families. Why? Because you can't afford it. But my side of the debate is going to win anyway, because we will not be able to afford it. We simply do not have the money. It's not going to happen. Asking the state to feed the family is like asking the child to feed a mother. The state is composed of families. The state can't feed the family. The family feeds the state. That's the right order of things. I understand that we're in the presence of people who think a lot about the teaching of the church. What feeds the family if not the state? What feeds the family is the church. The church is, we call her the Holy Mother for a reason. She feeds the family. So we need something on the other side of that balance to get the value up. Well, that's going to come from the church if it's going to come from anywhere. Therefore, my final conclusion about family policy is that religion policy, or freedom of religion, whatever you want to call what it is that we do to let churches do their work. Don't compete with the church. Don't replace the church. What are the things the church claims for herself? Well, in terms of society, the church claims two things for herself. She claims authority over marriage and family. She also claims authority over education. To the extent that the modern state in my country is the same as yours, to the extent that the modern state takes the job of education, she's competing with the church. And she's a much bigger player. She's going to win, but it's not good for the state in the end. So she should stop educating children. I'm going to end finally about the church. I understand some of you are Catholic, as I'm Catholic. In the church, I think these problems are very big. And I want to just say that the early church did not obsess over the disorder. The early church accepted that they were the minority, and they just spread through small communities in contact with each other. The church is probably smaller than we think that she is, and that's okay. We can build on this with small families and communities that exist everywhere. And we need to take seriously that the possibility that orienting the pastoral work of the church to the disorder undermines our opportunity to give witness. So I'm going to leave you with that. I want to say in terms of small communities that I'm going to go ahead and it's possible to pass on these values. My third son is getting married this summer. He's 19. One of Mark's sons is getting married this summer. He's 24. It's very possible in my son has no money in the bank, but he works hard. It's very possible to create a lot of interest in young marriage and young families if you just content yourself to do what you can do, which is to nourish faith in a small community. And I think that will start to correct these problems, but it won't be fast. Thank you.